What's up, everybody? Micah Curtis here with another writer diary for the lead up to Englewood Book 2. Gotta say, super excited to be doing this comic in general, and every little bit of progress that we're getting on things as we get ready to put the mailing list up and everything like that next month. I gotta say, I'm pretty freaking excited by just how this whole process is gonna go. We're looking at possibly launching the Indiegogo campaign sometime in May, and then of course the book would be done about 6 months down the line, maybe 7, depending, because it is, a 66-page book. And, man, every little bit that comes forth in regards to it just makes me that much happier. Specifically, we've got our cover artist for it. He's a guy that, aside from being a buddy of mine, super talented dude, that I think really flies under the radar in regards to being one of the best comic book artists that's around today. The fact he doesn't get as much credit as he does, I don't know, man. I don't get it. I don't understand why it's not there. But he's a guy I like a lot as a person, and a guy whose work I really enjoy. So definitely looking forward to seeing what he comes up with for me. That's for damn sure. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is actually building a world. So this is an interesting one for me because it gives me the opportunity to talk a little bit more about something I mentioned in the last video, in this idea that I have a world that I have created, this universe basically, where the foundations of it aren't really like Shakespeare or anything like that in regards to the type of writing, but rather in horror. And the type of stories that I really want to tell whenever it comes to each particular comic that's going to exist within that universe. Englewood being an interesting one just because how it has evolved. So let's go ahead and get into building a world and exactly how I built the Sleeveless universe, starting with both Englewood and also, by extension, Project Lazarus. Now, when it comes to world building within a comic book world, there's several different ways to tackle it. One of my favorites is to sell it through dialogue. Now, where I came up with this idea is I was actually watching a movie called Basic. Now, it's not the best movie ever, but I enjoy it. And one thing that I enjoyed about it is this idea that Samuel L. Jackson's character, who is supposed to be this uber badass sergeant, is built up through dialogue and flashback. You never really see him through the eyes of the main characters. Everything about him is narrated to you by someone else. And I always found that to be an interesting idea of how something would be perceived and how you would look at it. And I always thought to myself, how do you really world build through dialogue? Because this did a decent job of it, but how else would you do it, especially if you're introducing a superhero? On top of that, if you're going to put them in a scenario where they're to be understood to be a premier martial artist. So what I thought to myself is, I went back in time. I'm like, let's go back in time. Let's go back to the days when I lived in Chicago as a kid, and I'm riding around with Dad. Dad, of course, for those who don't know, was a minister, and we're going from place to place, running errands, going back to the church for whatever reason, and one common thing that Dad would have on the radio was either Rush Limbaugh, God rest his soul, or sports. Because, and it's Chicago, big sports city, and I mean, such a big sports city, we have an SNL skit about it, the super fans, yeah? So, when it came down to it, I realized after listening to hours upon hours upon hours of AM Chicago sports radio, that this would be a great way to give the history of a particular character without really having to have anything other than just a simple framing device. I don't have to do flashbacks for the sake of flashbacks with, little to no context. I can stick them in a framing device that if you are somebody who, likes mixed martial arts like I do, you can read it and get into it. But even if you're a layman, even if you're somebody who just knows just a little bit about the UFC, or if you know even pro wrestling, you can kind of understand the significance of this, because the best way to get perspective on someone's career and to establish their journey is through podcasting or radio. I mean, there's a reason that the Joe Rogan MMA show is probably the one podcast. Well, most people love the Joe Rogan podcast anyway, but that's the one MMA podcast that I would think gives you the best details in regards to, the lives of these fighters and what goes through their head while they're training and the things that go through their heads when they fight, because it's very candid. So I wanted a scenario where Elijah Wallace, as this character, as this Chicagoan, where he would be comfortable, where he's not really going to feel like he is, out of sorts, where he has to like play up as a character or anything like that. He can sit in his suit, be comfortable, and talk with people. Now, it's not mentioned in the comic, but he has been on that radio station before. So he knows the hosts, and they know him. So it's not like it's new. He went there to promote fights before, especially if they were in Chicago. So with this, we're given the opportunity to recap his career and basically give this idea of how he got his skills. Because a lot of people didn't seem to understand why I did this. So I'm actually going to go through it here as you guys can see it. I wanted to establish a character that is like a Shang-Chi, or is like an Iron Fist, or, Batman, Daredevil, is how did they get their skills? And in most cases, it's like, well, they trained with and then they trained with a ninja, and then they were amazing. Well, I didn't want to do ninja, at least not yet. Ninjas get introduced later. There's a reason one is on the cover of the first book. But I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have that sort of just like ninja. I wanted there to be more to than that. Like the actual hand-to-hand skill. Not the stealth or all the other stuff, but the actual hand-to-hand element. The part that's going to tie it all together and is going to make them a great fighter. Like how does that get established? So I really just kind of went down the MMA basics. First off, I made him a Greco-Roman and freestyle wrestler. He was a guy who came up in the NCAA and was an All-American. And basically that means that you are an elite level wrestler. And a lot of mixed martial arts champions have had that sort of a pedigree. Daniel Cormier, Brock Lesnar, Mark Kerr, Mark Coleman, Randy Couture, Dan Henderson, Matt Hughes, Josh Koscheck. Well, he was never a champion, but he was, a top 10 contender in the welterweight division for years. Another top welterweight contender for years, John Fitch. Like, these are all guys who had big-time wrestling pedigrees. Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz. I could go on for a while. But that is the best base for MMA. It really just is. It's a little cliche in the MMA world, but I completely agree with it. I suppose cliches come about for a reason. So that was the start. That's what I wanted him to do. And from there, his striking game develops as he, is coached differently from a different way, in a different method. And you'll get more information on who his coach is in the next book and also in some of the side stories. And that will, reveal a lot of things when you meet his mentor and everything. But as it stands, you also get something else established, is that, Elijah is a teacher now. His competitive days are over. Those are long done. He is officially retired. He's going to move into teaching. That's going to be the rest of his life as a martial artist. And even though I'm just a boxer and, I've done some Muay Thai too, I wouldn't call myself really a martial artist. Not in that sort of sense where I've mastered anything. Certainly not. I would think that the spare tire I have around my belly is evidence that I certainly haven't. But when I look at this sort of a story, I wanted to do something a little different in this idea that you have the teacher as the main character instead of, the secondary character. So, but what we've got established is that this world has, a big-time sporting background. MMA is huge there like it is in our world. And then from there, I basically have to admit that I kind of cheated. And the fact that I used Chicago. And it's basically the Chicago that we all know. It's crime-ridden. It's got a ton of problems. And those particular issues are why Elijah decides to step up and do what he does, to try to help other people find redemption like he managed to. And in a sense, that is what the scene where the fight in Elijah's gym happens, why that is there. Why is there a gang lieutenant in this gym? Well, it's because he wants to recruit his little brother into the gang, and Elijah ain't having it. So what it gives the impression of is that there's an outside force. And then by the end of the book, which, again, I'm not spoiling yet because I don't think everybody international has gotten their copy yet, to be honest with you, it gives this impression that this is a city where anyone who tries to rise up gets smacked right back down for whatever reason. Maybe they stand up to the wrong guy. Maybe they, cross the wrong individual, say the wrong thing, but they get smacked right back down, seemingly by the city itself. And it creates an inner conflict going forward. I remember when I was, doing early, can't really call it a press tour, but going on live streams and stuff like that to talk about my comic book, oftentimes what I would say is that one of my goals is for the city itself and my interpretation of Chicago to be sort of, prevalent in everything. And I'll tell you right now that the end of Englewood Book 1 is, in a lot of ways, my commentary on Chicago, even though it was subconscious when I wrote it. It is this idea that the people who actually want to do genuinely good things are never really given the credit that they deserve, and oftentimes just kind of fly under the radar. And the only times that good people will come up in the news is if they screw something up or they do something silly. I did a video a while ago on my main channel talking about a guy in Chicago who's doing a lot of good things for his community and trying to prevent carjackings and stuff, but then he tries to get with, a state representative here in Illinois to try to get Grand Theft Auto banned here. That's obviously a terrible thing to do. It's anti-free speech, yada, yada, yada. You all know my stance on that. But he's a good man who makes a mistake. But it's the mistake that he'll be known for forever, probably. And it's, something similar here. Elijah's a character like that who has his, reputation tarnished by the fact that he had a drug problem and that he, especially leaned on painkillers during a knee injury, and he ended up almost losing his final fight anyway. And by the way, short note, yes, all of those fights will come into factor later on. The events that happen in them, the damage he took, stuff like that, they will definitely continue to have an effect. But regardless, in building this particular world, that's what I wanted to feel as the reader. It's like if I'm on the opposite end and I'm reading this book, that's what I want to feel, is that this particular Chicago is pretty crushing. It's one that you can easily falter under the weight of. And if you screw up once, man, or you do something that upsets the, I'm going to act like the Joker for a second and say that it doesn't quite follow the plan. It's basically something along those lines, where that if it doesn't follow the plan, then you suddenly find yourself, well, on the worst end of anything that you can imagine. And then again, that's also part of the reason why the greater universe as a whole has a foundation of horror, which we'll continue to see in other books that I do with this brand that I'm creating. I say creating because it's still a process. It's going to take a while before the foundations are completely laid. But anyway, as you suffer through my ums and ahs, the thing that I wanted to give this impression of is a dark world. A world where if you try to battle back against the shadows fight back. And they fight back hard. And they will throw things at you that you would have never dreamed of ever experiencing. And that common theme, in my opinion, is sort of like life in the modern day. We find ourselves, any good person especially finds himself struggling against forces that seem to want to constantly see failure. I talk about cancel culture, things like that, in the articles that I write and the videos that I do. And in a lot of ways, that is emblematic of a larger issue, of that, again, that soul-crushing pressure of the modern culture, where there is more people who want to drag you down, like, the whole bucket of crabs analogy, than ever before. And some of whom will do whatever they can and yell as loudly as they can to make sure you can't even make a living if you offend them. And that's a crazy part of existence, isn't it? And it's not something that you would expect. But in a world where everybody's a public figure, well, that's the sad eventuality, especially in a culture that doesn't really seem to value the idea of celebrating success as opposed to, whatever we've got now. But that's the thing, is these people in these stories of mine, they are battling back against a shadow. They are battling back against hell. They are battling back against a darkness that threatens to consume not only their souls, but the souls of anyone who is innocent. And it is emblematic of many things. Some people would say it's emblematic of spiritual warfare. Some people would say that it's emblematic of whatever. It's emblematic of struggle. And not only struggle, but a struggle that is really, really dark and scary and horrifying, because whether you're dealing with people that themselves become monsters because of the things that they do in their life, like Carlos and Englewood, or actual monsters like you see in 3 Nights, 4 Days and will see in other books that I have planned, which, by the way, some of these monsters Elijah will actually cross paths with in the future. You battle these things, they will bite back, and they mean to destroy you. And that's where the stakes are. And it is, in a sense, a reflection of how, in a very artsy-fartsy way, I see the world. There's this old music, this old song by a band called Ra, R-A, like the sun god of Egypt, called Fallen Angels. And he's just talking about seeing fallen angels everywhere, And it's sort of that sort of a feeling. Like that's kind of, it's oddly enough, it's one of the songs I draw a lot of inspiration from when it comes to my writing, is this idea that this element, this soul-crushing element, and I use that a lot, but I want to emphasize that demoralizing world. It exists. It's out there. We can see it anywhere we go. And it can bring about great anxiety and paranoia, and it's very hard to keep your head straight even when you're succeeding because of all the things that desire to bring you down. And in a sense, because I basically created this universe and I basically took Chicago and put it on top of a portal to hell, we find a city that wants to consume everything within it in a figurative sense, and consume the misery and things like that, and feed off the misery. And as I continue to tell more stories within the world of Englewood, and I should just say the Sleeveless universe in general, you'll start to see that the world I am building is one of darkness. It is one of great trials and tribulations, a lot of death, a lot of terrible things that are going to go on here. But at the same time, the heroes of this universe are true heroes. They are people who refuse to be consumed by the dark. They refuse to be consumed by the things that want to change them and make them worse and make them terrible people. And in essence, that is what defines a hero. We're going to close it with this. I think one of my favorite moments in comic books in a long time was the second time I went back and I read Infinite Crisis, which was done by Jeff Johns. Well, he wrote it. I don't remember who the artists were. Somebody in the comments can remind me, and I would greatly appreciate it. I want to see George Perez worked on it, but I could be wrong. But anyway, the point where both Supermen, without hesitation, grab Superboy Prime to fly him through a red sun to defeat him, to stop him, without hesitating, spoke volumes to what a hero is. And at the end of the day, we're always going to be looking at Superman. And I don't think that we should ever shy away from that as writers. And I said to myself, that is the type of attitude that defines what a real hero is. When you're able to look hell itself in the eye and not break a sweat and be willing to fight back against what it has and what it wants to bring to you and what it wants to use to destroy you, that's a hero. I'm going to create a very dark world, but the light of the hero will shine even brighter because I am building it the way that I am. Hope you guys really enjoyed this little discussion on it, on world building and how I'm doing it, why I'm doing it the way that I'm doing it. If you have any questions for me, please put them in the comments, and let me know if there's any other elements of the writing process you would like to see me do as a writer's diary before we put this mailing list up. So, until next time, my name is Micah Curtis. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, have yourselves a wonderful day.